Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Ko Darrenball Tucker, Ingawa. Hello and welcome from wherever you are around the world. What we just did there was a greeting that was in Māori or Te Reo, and I basically said, I acknowledge you, I thank you for coming, and introduce myself as Darrenball, as the chair of ADHD New Zealand. Now with us today, we're delighted to have our friends with Google, with Roman Matla, Director of Asia Pacific Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, and Dr. Bunny Zhang, a security engineer from Google Sydney. Roman is in Singapore, I'm in Wanaka, and Bunny is in Sydney, so this is a truly global conversation. But before we go on, what I might do is ask you, Roman, first of all, to introduce yourself, and then we'll pass to you, Bunny.
Sure. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you for having us. It is an absolute pleasure to be here with all of you. My name is Roman Matla. I'm based in Singapore. I've been with Google for just over 2 years now, but I have been a diversity and inclusion practitioner for the last 20 years, based here in Singapore. I'm originally from Canada, but I think I identify far more as sort of part of this region, and certainly Singapore. It's been, like I said, home for the last 20 years. This was actually quite funny. This was a cold call for me in terms of getting involved with ADHD UK. The request came through LinkedIn, and I normally would never just jump on something unless it really, really meant something to me. And I responded to that cold call almost immediately. And we were able to connect with our friends and colleagues at ADHD UK, and said, listen, Google's really, really happy to get involved however we can, right? So we're going to share a couple of things that we do internally that I think helps us as Google and as Googlers. But again, it's just one of many sort of ways of tackling ADHD at work. So again, super happy to be here, very honored, and I'll pass it back over to you.
Thank you. And Bonnie, tell us a little bit about yourself as well in Sydney and what you do.
Okay, thanks, Darren. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here again. My name's Bonnie. I am now a security engineer at Google Sydney. I've been at Google for about 2.5 years. My story is I have known I have ADHD for about 3, 4, or 5 years now, and only went through the process of getting formally diagnosed earlier this year. I have been involved in the Asia Pacific subgroup of the ADHD group at Google, and that's how I got involved in this event. So Roman reached out in a similar situation.
Fantastic. I have to ask, what was the path to getting diagnosed as an adult actually like?
Yeah, so I think I had to really wait until I was ready. So I have sort of lived with ADHD basically my whole life, and have consciously known about it since probably the time where I was halfway through my PhD, so a couple of years ago. And then have basically managed that myself, figured I was surviving. And then a lot of people have said that, yes, you may be surviving, but medication for me personally was the thing that changed my life. And I heard that from a lot of people. So by the time I was ready to take that step, it was just, I knew it was going to be a long and expensive process. And I just went through those steps, and that got me to the point where I could access medication.
And what's your PhD in, Bonnie?
I did my PhD in astronomy, in astrophysics, and the topic was supernova cosmology, which is using exploding stars to measure the expansion rate of the universe.
So I have to ask, like, without sounding rude and being disrespectful to everyone else with PhDs, this is a PhD, right? So how do you do half a PhD with ADHD? What did you do? What are the sort of differences you noticed?
I found it really hard because I think up until that point I had been getting by, I think just through a structured environment and like getting through school that way. And then in undergraduate, just choosing subjects I had a lot of interest in, so in maths and physics, and still having a structured environment.
Yeah.
So I had no problem just sort of diving into problem sets and hyper-focusing for hours at a time. When it came to a research environment, it was very self-directed. So I had a wonderful supervisory panel. They're all very lovely, kind and caring people. I still found it hard to manage myself and apply that executive functioning that I don't have to structure my own research, my own learning, and how to just manage a thing that I was doing. As to how I managed, I think, so doing it with undiagnosed ADHD, I think I just was extremely pragmatic in how I did things. So what I mean is I had to be realistic about the limitations and what worked and what didn't work, instead of trying to be better. So for example, if I knew I had to have the accountability of writing a thesis in a public place, like a cafe where people could see my screen, then I could actually get more writing done that way. And so I would just do that. I also wrote in places that weren't a cafe. I worked basically everywhere. Things like setting up external deadlines. So for example, booking a final thesis talk for which people had to fly in from the state. That was a hard deadline. And setting a date at which I was transitioning from part-time work, so 2 days a week, to 5 days a week at my software engineering job. At which point I really needed to finish up.
And once you got diagnosed with ADHD and got the medication, how dramatic was the change?
It was like, so everyone has a different analogy for this. For me, it felt like my brain was a badly tuned radio that was almost at the right channel, but just slightly off. And then once I started the medication, it just was clear and quiet and calm. And I could actually focus on what people were saying and get through an hour-long meeting without being completely lost at the end. So it was remarkable.
I think you're remarkable to do a PhD in a subject like that. There's a lot of questions I have with you, but Roman, I understand you're a parent of someone with ADHD, and there will be a lot of caregivers who will listen to this little video. What is your story with ADHD?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. Yes, indeed. I'm a parent of 2 awesome kids, a son who has dyslexia and a daughter who has ADHD. My daughter was always the kind of child that she kind of always lived in her own world. And I remember when she was in primary school, at the beginning of her educational journey, you know, she was in a local school here in Singapore, and again, no disrespect to the system, but she was labeled as a child who you know, simply just doesn't pay attention, won't really amount to much. She was ostracized. She was the only child in the class that had, you know, a laminated rule set that was taped to her desk saying, I must do this, I must do this, I must do this. And I thought, you know, this just isn't right. And long story short, we moved her to an international school, which we thought was going to make a big difference. We actually moved her to the same school her brother went to. And again, this was now in year 4, as she had a new teacher that was new to Singapore and new to teaching. And again, my wife and I had this horrible parent-teacher conference, like the worst PTC we've ever had. And the teacher was labeling our daughter as a troublemaker, somebody who went out of her way to be mean to other kids. Like, she described a child that wasn't our daughter. And in her infinite wisdom, and bless her, she chalked it up to hormones and puberty, which I've learned subsequently that, you know, a lot of diagnosis around ADHD, particularly in young girls, is attributed to that. Just that, right? So my wife and I just said, listen, this is just not right. This isn't on. We went on to one of these closed, anonymous parent groups here in Singapore. And we asked for, does anybody know of an educational psychologist that we could work with? And we were put in touch with a gentleman here, fantastic psychologist, who spent the better part of 8 weeks with our daughter, on and off, doing a proper assessment. And the funny thing was, I think a lot of kids would have just said, oh my gosh, like, I have to do this again, and roll their eyes. Our daughter actually loved going to Dr. Richard. She absolutely, they got on so well, because what he did was he helped her identify that her ADHD was in fact, a superpower. And I know Henry hates that, or dislikes the term superpower, maybe perhaps in adults, but it's a wonderful way to describe ADHD to a child who simply just doesn't know why they are treated differently, or why they might behave differently than other kids. So needless to say, once she got the diagnosis came in and confirmed what my wife Heather and I had known for years and years and years. Ever since she was a toddler, we knew there was something unique about Kalina and the way she experiences the world. And it was a cool thing. Like, there was nothing bad at all. She's a wonderful, hilarious, empathetic, gorgeous, just little tiny human being who simply experiences life differently. And much like my pal Dr. Bonnie here, medication for Kalina was a game changer. And it was really, really difficult for us as parents to go down that path, because, I'll be real with you. I think parents go, geez, medication, and you start thinking, oh my gosh, is this going to somehow screw up my kid? Is she going to, it's like, is it going to chill her out to the point where her personality changes? What are the side effects? Is she going to be dependent on it? And so we tried a number of different avenues, and we landed on one particular medication that changed everything. So she went from, being labeled as a troublemaker to, absolutely flying through math, science, English, drama, art. She's following very much in the footsteps of her brother. Really, really creative and super intense with what she loves, right? But now that she's got the diagnosis, the school gives her the learning support that she needs to thrive. And I'm so grateful that we made that decision, to switch schools, but to also get a professional diagnosis done. And I think that's really, really key. And as uncomfortable as it may be as a parent, there are also groups like we have internally, and we'll talk about it a little bit. We have this ADHD group, in APAC and globally. And I joined that as a closed member of this community, and I learned so much. I mean, it was really, really a godsend for my family and I. So again, it's a long story, but contextually, it's really important for carers of kids, particularly kids with ADHD, that you take your time, do your research, but also take that leap of faith, because what we ended up doing was unlocking all that potential that she always had, but was never given the opportunity to really thrive and flourish.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. As a parent of 2 ADHD children, we have such remarkably similar stories from different parts of the world, which speaks to the fact that the issues with ADHD are global. But I just want to pick up on one thing that you mentioned, and that was the importance of a support group. Roman, can you quickly sort of talk about how important that is? And then Bonnie, I'm going to have a talk to you about the support groups that you helped start at Google. But I think they're really critically important.
Oh, you know what? We couldn't have done this. And it's funny, you can find support groups just about anywhere. I mean, now that the internet is just, it's chock full. So it's a double-edged sword, by the way. It's kind of like, when you have a cough and you go to WebMD and diagnose yourself, and then, oh my gosh, you've got everything wrong with you, and suddenly you're dying.
So true.
You can do that. You can totally do that with something like ADHD. You can get lost in the quagmire. But what was really, really helpful was the ADHD group at work, because that
Yeah.
allowed me to realize how many colleagues were actually living with ADHD and how many colleagues actually cared for others with ADHD. I also met with a woman who teaches at my daughter's school, and she's trying, I mean, God bless her, she is on like a crusade to change the educational system. And we actually went to her place, we had a bottle of wine with her, and she helped, she basically talked us off the ledge. We were so stressed out, we were so worried.
Yep.
If it wasn't for that community, she's got 3 neurodiverse children, and it was so helpful to realize that we weren't alone.
Yep.
And so you'll find the support in the unlikeliest of places.
Yep.
And once you do get that support, you'll realize very quickly that neurodiversity, and particularly ADHD, is a heck of a lot more prevalent than I ever thought. Right? It's all around us. So this concept of normality, it's, you know, normal. Like I said, normal people scare me. And the other thing that I'd like to say is, like, as the education systems evolve, I come from a family of educators. My dad was a calculus professor for 52 years. My grandmother was a teacher. My grandfather was a teacher. And yet, you know, like in 2022, many teachers are taught how to, you know, referee a football match as part of their PE curriculum, but they're not taught how to spot a child that may be neurodivergent, and they have no idea, and therefore they make these mistakes like, oh, it's just puberty. And that can you imagine what that must do to the confidence of a child, right? So again, those support, going back to the original questions, the support groups are all around us, and don't be afraid to reach out, because we're not alone.
Yeah, look, I think that's the underlying importance of a community, is that you're not alone. And also, when you're coming home, having been there, and your teacher and the school's told them that your child might be having problems with hormones in teenage years, to actually have a support group which turns around and says, no, don't give up and keep going. And 100%. Bonnie, I want to bring you into the equation. You've started a support group with Google for people with ADHD, haven't you?
Yeah, so as Roman mentioned, there's a global ADHD group that's within Google, and that's part of the formal employee resource group, or ERG, called Disability Alliance. So there's differing opinions on whether neurodivergence is a disability. Nevertheless, the ADHD group is part of that. And then I started an APAC subchapter for purely selfish reasons. So when I came to Google, I struggled a lot in the unstructured environment, and I at some point looked up ADHD on the internal search, and found this global group, and lots of people, lots of really useful conversations, lots of resources. They also had some monthly meetups, but if you're living in Australia, Google's quite a North American company. I think these meetups were happening about 4 a.m. Australian time. So at the time, I just sent out a few messages, said who would be interested in attending something that's in an APAC time zone. And enough people said yes that I just did the thing. And then now we have a smaller group that's got people in Sydney, Singapore, Tokyo, India, and we all get together once a month or so. No obligation, just drop in, and we have a smaller chat. And it's a very culturally diverse region. I mean, you can imagine that someone experienced in Australia is going to be very different from, say, Japan or India. So it's really nice to have that spread of different cultures and just be joined by time zone similarity.
Yeah, and again, very understated. I'm really keen to understand how you get people to come out and join a group. You don't just say, I have a group, and they come, or is that what happened, you know?
Sure. I think people didn't necessarily know about the APAC group to begin with. I think it helps a lot that at Google there's a culture where neurodivergence or other kinds of difference or deviation from normal, whatever that means, is celebrated. And it's a culture where you have people who are very senior and very successful in their careers. So engineering directors, senior managers, just very smart technical people, just talk about their ADHD like it's no big deal, because it's not. Like Roman has said, it's very common. It's extremely common in a place like Google. And so there's, when you join the global ADHD group, it's massive. There's so many people in it. And so I think people don't see it as more stigma than it really is. And there shouldn't be, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. In staying with you, Bonnie, what impact do you think of such a group and support groups in both the APAC areas and globally really have on Google's workplace diversity and inclusion approach?
I think they have been very important to feeling like you belong. So there's two sides of this. I think one is the practical help, or the resources. As I said, everyone's on their own journey and people at different stages and everyone has their own experience. So it's immensely helpful to have people who have gone through the same thing before just share their experiences of how they, for example, sought helps or told their manager or got access to medication or accommodations, or how to sort of frame their difference in how their brain works. And I think the other side of it is just community. So having people who get it, who understand how your brain works and are willing to just hang out and chat and share in your joys or frustrations.
It's, you know, it's so cool. You're actually living and being a leading example of what it's like. And so you would be an inspiration for people to come out and talk about their ADHD as well. And Roman, switching to you, you know, going from our previous conversation as well as this, you know, diversity inclusion, I get that, it's really important, but Google have really defined it quite a bit into this term belonging, and I'm interested to see really what that actually means for Google.
Yeah, it's something that I think all of us are really proud of. If you think about belonging and the essence of belonging, belonging transcends culture, it transcends language, faith, geography. It's the core of being human, right? We all need to feel that sense of community and that sense of belonging. And with that comes psychological safety, comes value, comes, it's not tolerance, right? It's really, truly being valued for who you are, regardless of who you are, right? It's a beautiful thing. And you can have, I think it's also something worth recognizing that belonging is not something that you cross a finish line and say, yep, I belong. belonging ebbs and flows, right? Based on the experience that you have at work, at home, in society, right? Little things can make you feel othered, which is the opposite of belonging, right? And so I think when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, these are all incredibly important and very different sort of components, almost like it's like an equation, right? And the belonging piece is that result, and that's what we want to get to. And I think we've done a really good job. It's not perfect, and no organization is. We're dealing with human beings, right? And so that in itself is complex because every single one of us is wired very differently. There are no two people that are the same. And so this search for belonging that we have at Google is something that, in particularly in APAC, where Bonnie mentioned we have such a wide variety, 15 different markets, dozens of languages and dialects. Like, how do you explain certain concepts like allyship or inclusivity? You can boil it down to the common denominator that we all need that sense of belonging, and that's I think one of the truly refreshing things that I've seen in my 20 years of doing this work is that I think we finally gotten onto something. We haven't perfected anything, but it is something that allows us to be us as Googlers in the office, warts and all. It doesn't matter who you are. We all bring something unique to the organization.
And you make it sound so simple, but how did you go about creating that sense of belonging? What are some of the training, events, things like that?
Yeah, and listen, so, when we talk about DEI, for example, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's not a program for us. It's not a series of events for us. It's part of our core DNA. So DEI in our DNA, if you will. And part of the strategy that we have, that we employ internally, like we've got our employee resource groups. We mentioned our Disability Alliance, but we've got, employee resource groups that focus on various communities, whether it's based on gender, based on culture, language, socioeconomic diversity, what have you. And those community groups come together not only to give voice to underrepresented communities, but also allows people to lean in as allies. And allyship, in particular around, neurodivergence or neurodiversity, is so incredibly important, because the neurotypical people oftentimes don't get a chance to understand what it's like to be neurodiverse, or how can I help you? How can I be a voice or an amplifier? But also, how can I learn? This is all about learning. So our ERGs are incredibly, incredibly important. The Disability Alliance that I spoke about, we have training. Training is great, but it's not a silver bullet. We have a neurodiversity self-paced online training, which actually I'm not a huge fan of self-learning. But I can tell you this was incredibly, incredibly helpful, because as I mentioned earlier, I've got a son who's got dyslexia and a daughter who's got ADHD. And those were two massive components. We also talked about autism, and like, it just blew my mind in terms of how little I actually knew at my starting point. So training helps sort of us realize, if you have this voracious curiosity, it does help us get better at being either more informed and being less ignorant, but also seeing how we can support each other. And then the last thing that I'd say is, like, again, we have this pretty cool culture at Google. And across APAC, we have a program that was modeled after the television show You Can't Ask That. And it's affectionately known as YCAT. And YCAT at Google, and this is like only done in Asia Pacific. Last week we had a session on living with depression and anxiety. Do you know how many people, like, there were over 100 people that just jumped on this call to listen to Googlers talk about their own story. Now that to me is also personal, right? Because I've dealt with that both personally and caring for somebody that had issues around mental health. And we've created these safe or brave spaces, and brave is probably a better term than safe. Brave allows us to screw it up sometimes, and oftentimes people will say something or do something with all the right intent, but the impact might be negative. So things like YCAT, things like our ERGs, the various events that we do have, allow us to come in and learn and realize that none of us are perfect, and that this is a learning journey, and it's about continuous improvement as individuals, and then collectively as a community.
And there's, I believe, over 100,000 employees across the world in Google. This is no easy task. Right? So you've scaled this basically.
And that's part of our culture. Like, Google's only 24 years old. It's a young company.
I know.
My son's 25. I mean, geez, I know what a 25-year-old is like. And Google, one of the coolest things about Google is that since our inception, when Sergey and Larry created the company, they leaned into the culture right away, and that culture was like, that was the nucleus of everything that we do, and it's so incredibly important for us. We maintain that, and that's what kind of makes us unique. And like I said, it's not perfect, but it allows people like myself and Bonnie to be able to come into a place where we're valued, and that is, you know what, I'll take that over any other job that I've ever had, right?
Well said. And look, many organizations, and there'll be those watching this going, we have such a culture. We do an annual employee survey, and they tick 4.5 every year, and so we must have an annual survey. I mean, how do you measure this? Because it seems much more real than say a celebratory lunch of a different culture. But you definitely measure it, don't you? Oops, just lost your sound there, Roman.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
You know
there you
what?
are.
2022, and we're still, you know, you're on mute. Apologies. Listen, we're an incredibly data-driven company, as you would imagine, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like what we do, and that data is important for us. We do the annual survey, right? That a lot of companies do, but for us, Google Guys goes far beyond it. It focuses on many different areas around you know, how employees are experiencing their time at Google. The one thing I'll say about, you know, employee surveys is that, remember that they're just a point in time. They're backwards facing, right? That doesn't tell you what behaviors need to change necessarily, or how you're going to change those behaviors. Maybe it tells you what needs to change. We lean into specifically a number of very you know, detailed questions that elicit responses around inclusion, right? And we call it the inclusion index. And a lot of managers, you know, they get their scores and they want to start fixing right away. Googlers are very driven to fix stuff, right? You know, this bias towards action. It's great, but you know, it does allow us to continuously look at, you know, what does need to change, and our leaders and our Googlers expect that things will change for the better, right? So I think where you have a culture that values that feedback. I have been in other organizations that when you got your annual survey, eyes would roll, right? You're like, oh,
I hear you.
120 questions, I got to fill it all out. But you know, the 90 or 100 questions that we fill out, they're meaningful, and it shows us that as an organization, we care and we want to act on that feedback. But also, you know, it's not just about Google Guys once a year. It's about creating an environment where you can talk about the things that need to change, or the things that are going really well, in an open way. So again, that culture of openness, the culture of, you know, continuous feedback, I think is what helps us keep our finger on the pulse in terms of how we measure things. And you can also, the other thing too, I mean, let's be real, we can't measure everything in this world. You can feel it. You can totally feel it, and it is a feeling. It's right here. You know when you belong, and you know when you don't, right? And it's pretty simple. So as a leader, you need to be looking around you and saying, am I creating an environment where everybody is valued? Am I checking my biases? Am I truly empathizing and understanding, you know, what others might be going through? And I think that's that constant. It's a good thing. It's a constant pressure on us as Googlers to always think about, you know, the collective, but also, you know, how do we show up in that?
And Bonnie, picking up on that, what's it like to feel like that you belong? What does that mean for you?
I think it mostly means that I am appreciated for who I am, and this isn't just for neurodivergent people. It's for anyone in the company. However they are different, or however they're not different. To feel like I don't have to be a different person. I don't have to hide like the ways in which my ADHD presents, for example. I can be appreciated for what I can bring to the table, for who I am, and not just tolerated. Which I think was something that Roman referred to, and something that came up in last week's conversation quite a bit as well. Just being appreciated.
And you would have come across, you know, perhaps friends, people outside of Google who feel like they don't belong. I mean, that must be a pretty scary place if you feel like you don't belong.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all been there. Let's put our hands up for those of us who have worked in environments that, you know, toxic would be an understatement in some cases. Actually, I did work with people that went out of their way to create really hard environments for people, and I don't understand that. And so it's nice to be on the polar opposite end of that, and to be sort of stewards of a culture that, again, not perfect, but boy, oh boy, I'd take this over anything else I've ever had.
That's right. And I guess also it must start from the very beginning, which is your recruitment process.
Yes.
So how does that work from building a sense of belonging? Because that's where it starts, really.
Yeah, of course. And let's sort of dissect this a little bit. When people are when we recruit, right? Prospective, employees, candidates will also Google whack us, right? They want to know what kind of environment, and that's fair, right? It's not just one way. It's not, you can't just have it all your way, right? Individuals, like before I was hired, I did all my research. I wanted to understand what the culture stood for, and it was something that, again, from a values perspective, really drew me in. It was like a magnet. And so, we're really committed to make, and this sounds sort of cliche, making diversity, equity, and inclusion part of everything that we do, particularly around recruiting. So our hiring managers go through a series of sort of reinforcement trainings, right, around unbiasing, around we have a program called Culture Add and not Culture Fit. And I remember speaking to somebody a couple of weeks ago when I was in Korea, and they were from a massive F&B organization, huge, one of the biggest in the world. And she was sort of debating with me. She's like, well, why would you want people that are different? Shouldn't you, by right, try and attract people that will fit your culture? And I said, but then you have, like, where's your diversity of thought and diversity of experience? Where's, like, no, I'm always looking for who can add that awesome piece that's missing. And so we work really, really hard, not just with our hiring managers, but also our recruiters, right? Because they're out there sourcing candidates for us. They're out there on the front lines. And they also need to speak to our culture eloquently in a way that's going to attract people. And it's not a sales pitch. You have to be honest. You have to be open. You have to be, genuine with how you speak about the organization. But again, we make no secret that we look at diversity as a superpower for us in the region. It is our superpower in this region, and we lean into it very, very, very much.
And both of you, I understand, have recruited people. I'm really interested at what stage, or if at all, do people come forward and say, I'm neurodiverse, I have ADHD, I'm autistic, I have dyspraxia. Is that something that you actively ask for, or do you sort of leave it to come out as you get to know them?
I think when you're hiring people, so I'll speak just purely from my experience. I've hired a team. We've had massive growth in my team over the last year and a half. And one of the questions that I ask as an interviewer, usually at the latter part of the conversation, is, are there any accommodations that you might need? And by asking that question, you're almost saying that I'm not assuming that you're just you come in and start your work, and that there's something that you might not actually need from us as a company to get the best out of you. And so it's a wonderful way. And again, I also think the way people interview and the conversation needs to be genuine and real. So I try and make people feel, again, valued for who they are and what they bring to any organization. But I wouldn't go out and say, like, please tell me everything about you. And this, people are nervous when you interview, right? It's hard, and a lot of interviewers are equally, nervous. So I think one of the things that we need to do is not be afraid to ask, is there something that's missing? And then that opens up a door and allows us to make modifications, whether it's to the workplace or to a schedule, or understanding what each of us might need from an individual perspective.
And Bonnie, just building on that question, what sort of accommodations for you personally does Google have, which can help you be amazing with your ADHD and amazing as a security engineer, which doesn't sound like the easiest of jobs either?
Sure. So for me personally, I haven't asked for any accommodations. There's many different kinds which are available. Things like sitting in a less trafficked area. Everyone gets noise cancelling headphones. I have seen people sort of set up light blocking devices. The most extreme example was someone who built a tent in their cubicle and just worked inside it to not get distracted. The environment which has helped me, I think, has been just people who, like Roman said, have left the ball in the employee's court to disclose and ask when anything needed. And there's many people who I've told who have reacted with, okay, cool, no big deal. Here's my personal experience with ADHD. And I think that makes it a lot easier to just be able to say, okay, I'm having a bad focus week, or this is what I'm going through right now, and this is what you could do to help me if I need that. And just being able to ask for help and know that I won't be judged for it.
Yeah. And look, I'll give you an example that makes me worry a little bit. So I mentioned before, I'm a father of a teenage son with ADHD. And in effect, he loves doing his homework and study with loud music as much as possible. It's YouTube. And I'm nearly 50. And I just think that can't happen like that. And, we've had some tension about it. And I don't know if I'm disappointed, but he won. He can study a very loud music. It's not Bruce Springsteen, I can tell you that. And on top of that, he does much better. And I think where I'm getting to is, obviously he's taught me that giving some accommodations, and I've got a bias that my way is right, is a problem for me, not for him. And I'm really interested how you have that conversation with a manager who's saying, what do you mean you're not listening to Bruce Springsteen? What do you mean you need headphones? Just look quiet, just start typing. I mean, it's really their problem as a manager, not the person who's neurodiverse, isn't it?
Yeah, and thankfully I haven't had to. I think it helps when people just trust you to know what's best for you. And I really liked your example about your child with the headphones last time, because we were just talking about the ways in which neurodiverse or ADHD brains are different. And I had a friend who explained it to me as music was the way that she taped the thread of her brain that distracted her so she could just get on with her work. And that to me made perfect sense. And I think that leads into how I think employees can contribute more to the workplace just by having brains which are slightly different. One way I can see ADHD brains as being different, to generalize majorly, is we tend to have more parallel things going on at the same time. So I think that leads to more easily context switching and getting distracted, but also being able to make creative links between seemingly unrelated things and to problem solve outside the box and to connect dots which other people may not be able to see.
Again, I love the way you two speak like this is a way of life throughout the world, right? So there'll be people who are watching this, and there's certainly people out there who for years have been trying to replicate the Google model, right? But very few organizations are stepping into diversity and inclusion and bringing that sense of belonging. And I really appreciate how authentic you've both been. And so my question to you, Roman, is why do you think, especially for a company like Google, where everyone wants to replicate it, why do you think companies are not getting it?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't know if it's so much that companies aren't getting it. I think diversity, equity, and inclusion in many instances is still seen as a program. It's an HR thing, right?
Yeah. Oh, Roman has left the meeting. I'm sure he's leant on the wrong button and he'll be back. But I'm going to be a bit rude, Bonnie, and ask you that question, because I was going to, why do you think people and other organizations don't get it?
I think one thing Google gets right is we approach it from the top down and also from the bottom up. So what that means is there's programs like what Roman's leading and has referred to, where we think about DEI as part of all of our work and have that training for managers, directors, senior leadership, and so on. But also what that does is fosters an environment where people can form grassroots organizations like the ADHD group. And it becomes part of the culture to talk about what people need in the community and just be able to talk about difference and belonging from the level of the employees who benefit from that.
Yeah, look, that's a really good point. There's so much top down that still an organization can't change. And then, but, you know, grassroots, that's the real connection, isn't it? Yeah, I get that. Look, we are running out of time, but I quickly want to talk about COVID. COVID would have created some issues for Google, depending on what country you're in as well, like it did for the rest of the world. And I understand you moved to a hybrid working week as well with Googlers.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm on a team that's currently 2 days in the office. So we get the best of both worlds. We get to work from home and have focus time, and we also get to see our colleagues in person. I think the start of work from home was really challenging for a lot of people. It was difficult to start at Google at that time. But I think transitioning a whole company the size of Google to that environment and then going back to the hybrid work week, we have learned a lot. Hello again, Roman.
Hello, Roman.
Have learned a lot about.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so we're back. The good thing is we can edit this. So
that's okay. I think it's part of the experience.
I think it's hilarious, right? You asked me this question and boom, my laptop. And you know, it's funny. I was charging my earphones. Forgot to plug it back into my laptop, and boom. So I apologize. Maybe we can do one of those.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
There will be the conspiracy theorists out there who will say Google didn't want you to say that.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe I'll start again. I mean, it's not that companies don't get it. I think it's still seen in many cases. It's a nascent journey for some companies. So it's starting off. And it's funny because, again, I look at Google. We've been around for 24 years. This was part of the culture, and I think organizations that embrace that and make diversity, equity, and inclusion a part of their strategy, like you would any business strategy. This is how we treat our employees, also the communities that we live and work in, right? So our products and our services need to be inclusive as well. I think we're seeing a difference and a shift. I can say that in 20 years, attitudes have changed since since I got into this work. I mean, when I first started doing this work, I was called a waste of headcount. People said this is an American problem, and I said, well, that's good. I'm from Canada, so I can do this work. and yeah, it was not. It was really difficult, and particularly in this region where people said, like, this is Asia. We have this. Diversity is not a big deal. Diversity is one component. Diversity is simply difference, and diversity that goes unchecked, right? And you unlock the power of diversity through inclusion, right? And if you don't do that well, then you've got conflict. Look at the world around us. We live in a polarized world because of difference, right?
That's right.
And so I think companies need to study this as a phenomenon in business success. I actually think there's not just the moral case for DEI, but certainly a business case. You're going to outperform companies that don't
I think so.
Part of their culture.
Yeah. And, and organizations may want to be a little bit selfish about this as well. You are going to outperform, right?
Yeah.
And then the second part, and this will be an issue for Google, I suspect, you want to attract the right talent. And it's not just about having a great brand like Google does and all the cool things it's done. You still want the right talent, such as Bonnie.
Yeah.
And if you pay lip service to diversity and inclusion, it's not going to work. People you're hiring will see right through it.
Yeah. 100%, 100%. And
Yeah.
that's why I think, you know, we need to be real about this. I I try and have discussions with people that are genuine. I try and talk about this in a way that we can easily understand each other. I don't regurgitate textbook sort of DEI cliches that are out there, you know. I refuse to do that because this is, again, to me, this makes perfectly good business sense. And you know, it's, to me, it's a no-brainer, but maybe I see the world through my glasses. So
that's right. And one of the other issues I suspect is that in many, well, certainly in New Zealand's experience, in my experience in New Zealand and a little bit in Australia, D&I is something that HR leads. But when I look at it, Google, from what you were talking about, it's every manager, it's all the leaders. You know, this is part of your DNA. It's not the person at HR exec or leadership table going, here we go, we now need to do this, is it?
It goes from the CEO to the intern and everyone in between. I mean, it is everyone's responsibility to, we're all stewards of our culture, right? So, you know, to suggest that this is HR's thing, which a lot of companies do, right? You know, HR will handle it. No, we're all, in fact, when I came and joined Google 2 years ago, I was blown away at how many different, it was like herding kittens, right? We had every different group in the organization doing amazing stuff. I thought, no, and that's because they're empowered. People are empowered to do the right things in a culture that values, you know, difference. And
that's right.
That's really cool.
That is cool.
So it's just a massive opportunity. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is an opportunity. It's not a problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah. Now that's the quote of the day. It's an opportunity, not a problem. And that's how many organizations think about it. Now, before you disappeared on us, Bonnie and I were just chatting on COVID and hybrid working. And part of me thinks it's reassuring that Google had the same problems going to hybrid working and with COVID, except thinking about it, it would be much worse because you had COVID across multiple workplaces throughout the world. And say in New Zealand instances, you know, it's just one country to look at. So it would have been quite hard going to hybrid working, I suspect.
Yeah. I mean, hybrid work listen, it's not just something that, you know, affects Google. It affects all of us, right? The playbook wasn't there 2.5 years ago, right? And I remember 20 years ago trying to convince people that flexible work was a good thing, and it's going to be part of how we do things. And I was laughed at, saying our shareholders will never allow people to work part-time. Wow. The world has changed, but this is the next normal, right? It's the next normal. So we need to adopt that strategy of flexibility. Hybrid work has its challenge, you know, in terms of how people feel and their sense of belonging. You know, case in point, I have a team where, you know, 7 of us are based in Singapore. I have people from all over the region that are also part of the team. You know, some work remotely, whether it's from home or somewhere else. Others work in other offices. And I'm conscious that when the video conference ends and the rest of us get up and go to lunch together, there's this, you know, there's a natural fear of missing out, the FOMO effect that exists, right? And as a leader, you have to sort of temper that. One really cool thing that I saw was one of our leaders in the region, one very senior leader, will go and find a phone booth and take a video conference there and actually extricate themselves from people because this person realizes that there are other people on the video conference that are solo, that are alone in a different location. And so I think when we practice things like that, it's the little things that really make a difference. And hybrid work, it's tough. Like I said, we're still figuring it out. We're building the plane when we're flying it, right? And you know,
and like that.
Going back to creating a brave space. Sometimes we're going to get it wrong. Sometimes, you know, but if you listen to everyone's voice, we'll get it better. Not necessarily right, but we'll get it better, right? And so I think hybrid work, it's here to stay. Guess what?
I
The
think
days
so.
of 9 to 5, 6 days a week or 5 days a week in an office are long gone. I personally, as a leader, I look for output, not FaceTime, right? So I don't clock people, when they come in, when they leave, how much leave they take. We have processes for all that, but if people are respected and treated fairly and with dignity, you know what, they're going to give back in spades. So I think the hybrid work environment for us is a real opportunity. But I'm also, but it's different courses for different horses, right? So me personally,
right.
I'm calling in from home because I have an errand to run later on this afternoon, but I'm the type of person that loves to work in the office. And that's cool, right? So there are some people that want to be, and Google offices are incredible, right? To me, that's part of the magic and that's part of the allure. For others, it's okay. It's not a judgment. It's you work where you are most productive. And you know what? I think there's a nice sort of balance that needs to take place when we look at hybrid.
And look, isn't it amazing what happens when you have respect and trust in the workplace? Because that's really what it's about, right?
Yeah.
Bonnie, just to go back to you, you joined Google during the pandemic, I think. And so what are the challenges and benefits personally of doing it at such an interesting time, shall we say, as a neurodiverse employee? I mean, how did you get through it?
I think it was hard just because it was in the first weeks of everyone going remote. No one had done it before. I was on a team that I hadn't met in person before, and they were, again, lovely people. But I got to know them a lot better once we met face to face. And there was so much information to take in. So for me, it was hard because I hadn't really yet learned how to just learn everything in a way that didn't feel like drinking from the fire hose, to use a very Google expression. But I think navigating the work from home period and then navigating a transition to hybrid, Google has learned a lot about, as Roman referenced, just embracing what works for everyone, trusting people to know what's best for them, and just enabling them to do the best work they can. And I think not just for COVID, not just for neurodiverse employees, everyone's different. Some people might have health conditions, which means they have a different risk profile. Some people cannot hear or see, for example. And it's really just about letting people do their best work and doing whatever it needs to make that happen. And I think the transition to hybrid has taught us a lot about ways in which we can do that. That's
right. And I think it also is an opportunity to show what a true culture of belonging could achieve as well.
Absolutely.
Look, we have talked about some amazing things. So before we go, and thank you for your time, and thank you for allowing us to have an insight to Google for the second time. I'm going to ask one question. What is your final thought in respect to ADHD and belonging in Google? And I'll start with you, Roman, and then Bonnie, I'll ask you to just add on the end as well. What's your final message?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the final message is, be curious, be an ally, look around you. If you think you know everything, you don't. But also, give people some grace as well. We have dealt with 2.5 years of a pandemic. We're dealing with, raging wars. We're dealing with unthinkable atrocities that are happening in the world. So people are stressed right now. So I think the one thing, and particularly with people who are neurodiverse, like we can't see what's going on in somebody's mind, right? We can't. You see somebody with a cast on, you give them a break. You're not going to expect them to run a marathon because they've got a broken leg. But when you experience life differently, or you have a different lived experience, we can be quick to judge. And I think maybe that's it. Don't be quick to judge. Learn, and support each other. I mean, that's what I think little bit of kindness is something that we need more of in this world today.
Mm.
So, I think this this summit, that the conference that was put on, is a fantastic idea. Follow the sun, ADHD UK, ADHD New Zealand. You've got friends at Google now for life. It's just been a pleasure to be with all of you, and to be honest, it's something, it's the highlight of my year to have been a part of this. So thank you again.
Oh, kapai, thank you for that. And Bonnie?
Yeah, I really like the be curious and be kind as just a motto for life, really. My takeaway would be just to embrace difference, embrace the way people like different things, are good at different things, are interested in different things, and can bring different strengths to the table. It would be really boring if we were all the same. And so whether it's neurodivergence, anything else, yeah, that's a plus and not a minus. And yeah, thank you again, Darren and Roman. It's been really fun to be part of this.
Yeah, it's just magic. And I want to wrap up and thank you so much. From a proverb that talking to you last time, I think really, I think I understand it for the first time. It's very popular in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and it goes something like this: E haha te mua nui a te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. And that translates in te reo to what is the most important thing in the world. It is people, it is people, it is people. And that's exactly my message and what I hear from you guys. And I just can't hear enough how much I appreciate you giving us the time. It's a really big step forward and certainly a highlight of my year as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you all.
That's really lovely, Darren. Thank you.